Hello, my name's Nigel Thorne. I'm from Wales, and I have concerns about the influence of queer theory on Welsh Government policies relating to young people struggling with gender distress. In September 2022, I wrote to Health Minister Eluned Morgan expressing these concerns and providing evidence in a Substack page I wrote. The page was called The Ideological Capture of the Welsh Government. In October 22, I received a reply. Thank you for your email of 3rd of September to Eluned Morgan, Minister for Health and Social Services, regarding gender identity. I have been asked to reply and apologise for the delay in doing so. The Welsh Government is committed to strengthen equality for everyone. We believe that respect, tolerance and kindness must form part of our school communities and cultures to create an inclusive, engaging environment where everyone's well-being is considered and everyone feels accepted, safe and ready to learn. It is important to recognise that trans children and young people in particular can be a vulnerable group of learners in need of support from their teachers and schools. We are committed through our LGBTQ+ action plan to supporting children and young people and our practitioners to ensure our learners can thrive within our education settings. In response to a letter to Jeremy Miles, I was informed that the LGBTQ+ action plan will be used as a route to consider and develop national transgender guidance for schools. The LGBTQ+ expert panel have evidently been extremely influential in the creation of the LGBTQ+ action plan. Now, some have criticised the makeup of the panel for not including people who are critical of queer theory and gender identity essentialism. Indeed, there are concerns that the views of the panel are tainted by an ideological acceptance that gender identity is innate and hence that there is such a thing as a transgender child. The panel included two members of Stonewall Cymru, Joe Rossiter and Iestyn Wyn. Stonewall teach organisations that gender identity is innate. As Stephanie Davies-Arai from Transgender Trend states, if gender identity is innate, then there must be such a thing as a transgender child.
So the political campaign of transgender activists has two key goals. One is to establish gender identity as the distinction between men and women in society and in law, and the other one is to establish affirmation and social transition as the only legitimate approach towards children with gender dysphoria. And these two campaign goals are inextricably linked, because if you're saying that gender identity is innate, then you have to say children are born with it.
The panel included two late transitioning trans-identified males, Kat Burton and Kate Hutchinson, who advises the Welsh Government on trans and non-binary inclusion in schools. Both believe that they are literally women.
If we need to look into what is sex, what we must avoid is the simple fact that the protests against us being female or male are using Year 11 science.
Not all biologists agree.
So it is, to me, as a biologist, distinctly weird that people can simply declare, I am a woman, though I have a penis. That seems to me to be a strange distortion of language, because language is useful as something to express your thoughts clearly.
Not all trans-identified males agree.
This whole concept of gender identity, which we've been sold, is, well, it doesn't need to exist. And in my view, if it doesn't need to exist, why has it been invented? And it's been invented to create this concept of this trans person. You are trans because you have this, almost like a soul-like, concept inside your head. You've got a female soul or something. One suggestion which I would never be allowed to say on Twitter, careful if you tweet this, is that trans women are men with a certain type of psychological disorder which creates an insatiable need to present in the same way as a woman. But it doesn't mean that we're a woman.
And why can't we say
that? Because it denies people's identity.
Unsurprisingly, both Hutchinson and Burton endorse the use of puberty blockers on children.
a young person from the age of 12, possibly, if they have actually started to go into puberty and they're showing levels of distress because of that, they may be prescribed hormone blockers, which are a thing that puts puberty on hold. It's like pressing the pause button.
Another member of the panel was Emma Renold from Cardiff University, the chair of the Sex and Relationships Education Expert Panel. Renold has written of her goal of queering childhood. Although there is no evidence that it exists as a biological essence, gender identity is required by queer theorists to dissolve the binary oppositions between male and female. She tells teachers that children have a right to gender identity. She says that trans men are men, and she welcomes the removal of the parental right to withdraw a child from RSE.
Children's rights to RSE is also now protected by ending the parental right to withdraw. So parents will no longer be able to withdraw their children from RSE, which means that all children will now have the right to participate in this new, holistic, developmentally appropriate RSE.
Helen Joyce explains.
The only sense in which a man can become a woman or a woman can become a man is by saying so. It's a speech utterance. And so I've come to see, I think there are many things happening here. There's things happening in medicine, in politics. But one of the things that's happening is a long run, maybe 2 or 3 century move towards seeing categories and classification as inherently oppressive. So people think, heteronormative is a bad thing, or they think that, the traditional family is constraining. And they miss the point that these things often, like when I say evolved, I don't mean like evolutionary biology. I mean that they came to be over significant amounts of time for a reason, and they're supportive as well as constraining. But everything that's structured or categorized or named or classified, that's now seen as something imposed upon people. So somebody like Judith Butler, for example, who's the queer theorist who wrote Gender Trouble, which is kind of the foundational text that academia uses when looking at these issues, says that gender is an imitation for which there is no original. That she doesn't see sex. She says sex is socially constructed and gender is the real thing. And there isn't any foundation for gender. It's just something that's made meaningful by performing it over and over again. Now, I hadn't come across this at university. As I say, I studied mathematics. And I spent my time proving theorems and defining my terms very carefully. So I was blissfully ignorant of the fact that significant numbers of young people are being taught this sort of nonsense. But they come out of it thinking that somebody who says, look, there are 2 sexes and the sex that you are is the sex that you were conceived as, they think that what you're doing is imposing social roles on them.
The panel included Dr. Sophie Quinney from the Welsh Gender Service, who rubbishes the idea of social contagion and celebrates the removal of mental health assessment for people with gender dysphoria.
Because we now have our own service, we don't require people to go through the mental health teams. If they're age 17 and a half and over, they can be referred directly now to the Welsh Service by their GP. So that's a huge relief to have that put in place.
Dr. Hakeem has worked with transgender patients for 2 decades. He disagrees. In an article written for Merched Cymru in September 2021, he writes, I'm very concerned with Welsh Government's proposed affirmation-only model for gender dysphoria. Based on my clinical experience, this seems to be a potentially dangerous approach. There is a presumption that all patients presenting with gender dysphoria are the same, and that one solution fits all. This is not the reality. Another panel member was Lisa Caudry-Bruce, nurse, Doctor of Advanced Healthcare Studies, Children's Rights Lead, LGBTQ plus trustee, Pride Cymru. Caudry-Bruce claims that children are at a hugely increased risk of suicide if they are not socially affirmed, even without parental consent. She also claims that children are at an increased risk of suicide if they are not prescribed blockers. A comedy writer and Miriam Grossman disagree.
Dr. McNamara claims that social and medical interventions are the only evidence-based treatment and that scientific evidence shows it is life-saving. Without it, she's warning us, kids will commit suicide. Well, a growing number of countries have effectively banned the care to which she's referring. And thank God there's been no wave of suicides or other mental health catastrophes.
Another member of the panel was Urania Vanvaka-Tatsi, one of 3 members of Glitter Cymru who were members of the panel, but she seems to be the only one who turned up to meetings. Rania is very scathing toward those who hold gender-critical views. Psychotherapist Stella O'Malley has co-authored a book, When Kids Say Trans, a guide for thoughtful parents. In a radio interview, she was asked why she felt it was important to write the book.
I think it was imperative. I think many of us know about the trans debate. We know how vitriolic it is. We know how much pain and anger has been around people being cancelled. I don't think people have quite understood how utterly devastating it has been for parents and for families. The reason why they haven't, they will hear about it. But right now, those families are generally in the middle of an unfolding medical scandal, and their kid has been wrapped up in it. And, we generally, most parents care more about their kids than anybody else. And so their most precious person has been caught up in something that makes this kid, there's nothing more alluring in life, arguably, than to be told when you hate yourself, you hate your body, you hate everything about you, that there's a pill you can take and you can be a different person with a different name and a different identity, and nobody will be able to refer to that old, awful, humiliated, shameful self. Instead, you can be somebody new and you can start again. And nobody will be able to refer to it, because that's the trans identity kind of ideology that's being offered to these teenagers. They're very often autistic. They're very often very naive. And they're very often incredibly cerebral, but completely disconnected from their bodies. And their parents are frantic. They're frantic. They're cross-eyed with distress. And they're trying to figure out, how do I help my kid? And so often, many of them have ended up going to gender identity clinics, thinking that they were doing the right thing by their kid. And I remember one parent saying, it was like I was in a horror movie and the doctor kind of removed his mask and he was the villain, the monster that was going to get my kid. That's what it felt like for one parent who was in a gender identity clinic.
The chair of the panel was Lou Thomas, whose LinkedIn profile describes her as skilled in engagement management, public engagement, government, young people, and event management. Thomas is highly dismissive of gender-critical views. There's quite a contrast to listen to the response of Hannah Blythen to legitimate concerns raised by Laura Ann Jones, to the comments made on social media and elsewhere by the Welsh Government appointed chair of the LGBTQ plus expert panel.
Deputy Presiding Officer, it's hard to find the right words to respond to Laura Ann Jones's contribution. Yeah, shameful, and I don't think I have much to say in response to that, because, we've just talked in this chamber earlier today and we've got members of the community who are here watching. Your words have a dangerous impact, Laura Ann Jones. It harms people. The words that you say, the discrimination that comes out of your mouth. And what I would say, I believe you're better than this. I think you're better than this. I think you're better than this.
Over 2 years, there has been a 90% increase in the number of people referred to the Welsh Gender Service. A spokesperson for Cardiff and Vale University Health Board said, "The Welsh Gender Service is committed to promoting a culture of inclusivity, supporting our communities and our patients to feel comfortable being their true, authentic selves." Dr. Miriam Grossman has a different perspective.
Not too long ago, the parents that I saw in my office were concerned about the hookup culture and friends with benefits. They worried that their teen daughters might get pregnant or infected with herpes. Those were the good old days. Now the parents that I see are asking me for Xanax for their panic attacks and insomnia, Their daughters want to grow beards and have their breasts removed. I am reporting to you from the front lines of the war on gender ideology. I am not a journalist, I am not an academic, and I am not part of a think tank. I am a medical doctor who's in the trenches, helping families with children who believe their bodies are terrible mistakes. Some of my patients wear tight elastic binders to flatten their developing breasts. They go through the day in pain, feeling lightheaded and short of breath. Many of my male patients shave their chests, arms, and legs to erase signs of masculinity. Forgive me for being graphic. One 15-year-old patient tapes his penis between his legs and pushes his testicles up into his inguinal canals. He does this to create a flat, feminine crotch. My patients have gender dysphoria. They are dissociated from their bodies. They have trauma, depression, anxiety, autism, eating disorders, and other mental health problems. Their suffering is intense, and they are convinced that relief will come only from testosterone shots, estrogen patches, and a surgeon's scalpel. Their parents' worry and anguish cannot be described. I've been asked to speak today about how gender ideology is a medical experiment on our children. To be more precise, the actual experiment is gender-affirming care that the American Psychiatric Association and our Health and Human Services tells me I must provide. It's an experiment because instead of psychotherapy that slowly and gently explores a child's difficulties and provides emotional healing, it calls for interference with normal development, followed by permanent and drastic alteration of her healthy body. There is no high-quality evidence that gender-affirming care leads to long-term positive outcomes or decreased suicides, while there is conclusive evidence of serious harm and lifelong suffering. Gender-affirming care calls for unquestioning acceptance of a child's chosen identity, even though that identity contradicts reality. It means placing the child in the driver's seat, no matter how young or troubled he may be, allowing him to pick his name, his pronouns, his clothing, and his bathroom. This is all called social transition. Likewise, decisions to block puberty, to take cross-sex hormones, and undergo surgery are based on the child's or teenager's wishes. That is not practicing medicine. That is rubber stamping a child's self-diagnosis. Gender-affirming care is centered on two assumptions. First, that regarding gender, children and adolescents know best who they are and what they need. And second, that it is possible to be born in the wrong body. These beliefs have not been proven. There is no evidence that they are legitimate. Nevertheless, for the past 10 years, affirming care has been widely accepted in the US as the first-line treatment for gender dysphoria. This would not be accepted in any other area of medicine. Recently, Joe Biden and his Assistant Secretary of Health, Dr. Levine, advised parents that early hormone and surgical treatments are crucial for their gender-confused children. I very much doubt, however, that either the president or Dr. Levine realize that the foundation for the treatments they call crucial is a single study of only 55 subjects. Gender-affirming care is based on one small case study, a study that many authorities consider problematic. This is a complicated subject, but here's what you need to know. Until the 90s, gender transition was only performed on adults, mostly on men in their 30s and 40s. The cosmetic results were not good because they'd already gone through puberty and they looked masculine. After transition, their mental health was poor and suicide rates were high. A team of Dutch researchers thought if they could intervene before puberty and prevent masculinization, these individuals would be able to pass as women and their mental health would improve. So they very carefully, keyword, carefully, picked a group of kids who they thought were likely to identify as transgender for the rest of their lives. They only chose kids who had severe gender dysphoria since childhood, and they couldn't have any serious mental health issues. And they were very strict about this. At age 12, puberty was blocked. At 16, either estrogen or testosterone were given to simulate the puberty of the opposite sex. And then at 18, surgery was available. This is called the Dutch protocol. Many find it problematic for different reasons, but let's just put that aside. Let's just say that 1.5 years after surgery, patients reported that their dysphoria was decreased. Okay, sounds good at first glance, so why not use the Dutch protocol today on all the kids that are flooding our offices with gender dysphoria? Here's why. Right now, nearly all the kids that are being seen are victims of a social contagion called rapid onset gender dysphoria. They develop their symptoms as adolescents, not children. And the creation of their new identities is fueled by friends, pornography, and influencers on the internet. Most of them are girls with other psychiatric diagnoses. These kids would all have been disqualified from the Dutch study because the protocol excluded kids whose dysphoria developed later in adolescence and those who had significant mental health issues. The young people at today's gender clinics and hospitals are a completely different group of children. It's like two people who complain of knee pain. One fell and the other has arthritis. They have the same symptom, knee pain. Do we treat them the same way? Obviously not. Not only that, but the Dutch discouraged social transition. Gender-affirming care supports socially transition at very early ages, even in 3- and 4-year-olds. Medical interventions in the United States are available earlier than in the Dutch study. Kids can get puberty blockers as young as age 8, and they can get cross-sex hormones at 14. And surgery, well, who knows? It's the Wild West. Some surgeons say that they have no lower age limit. And we know that at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles, a 13-year-old breasts were removed. The Dutch provided extensive mental health support for these kids and their families, whereas now, at Planned Parenthood and other places, prescriptions are handed out for hormones after one short meeting, and there's no mental health evaluation whatsoever. These concerns have been raised by the Dutch researchers themselves. Those researchers that the Dutch protocol, that was their invention. And they have said, what are you doing? Why are you adopting our model to this new presentation of gender dysphoria? We need more research about this new population. They are different. The same caution is urged by medical authorities in Britain, Sweden, Finland, France, Holland, Belgium, Australia, and New Zealand. They studied the data and they concluded that the research is very low quality. For example, concerning puberty blockers, the editor-in-chief of the British Medical Journal, who is also director of the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, said, "The quality of evidence in this area is terrible." So in those countries that I mentioned, medical interventions on minors have either been sharply curtailed, or the groups they're urging great caution. And they're saying, take care of mental health issues first. Regarding hormones and surgeries, there's no evidence of long-term benefit, but there is a high risk of damage. Let me turn for a minute to the damage of the experiment called gender-affirming care. While there are people who are pleased, for some, the damage is catastrophic. The list of possible medical problems from blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries is extensive. I couldn't possibly discuss all of them in these few minutes. A few areas of concern: bone density, heart attacks, blood clots, strokes, early menopause, sexual dysfunction, infertility, effects on brain development, and that's only from hormones. We didn't even get to the surgeries. Now, regarding the surgeries, for a while, I actually considered displaying for you a stream of photos, there's so many of them available, of girls 14, 15 years old with fresh mastectomy scars on their chests, or even worse, the so-called bottom surgeries, a euphemism, of course, for castration, followed by construction of what's called a neo-vagina, which is, of course, not at all a vagina, and the genital surgeries done on women who want to appear as men. These surgeries come with an alarming rate of complications, some of them very painful, dangerous, and debilitating. A nightmare, hideous. So I imagined having these big screens and showing these horrific pictures to you, but the room is not set up for that, so consider yourselves lucky. They are images that you would not easily forget. So instead, no pictures, but I am going to read to you the harrowing words of a woman who lived as a man for 8 years before returning to her female identity. She is what's called a detransitioner. She transitioned, and then she decided that she would like to go back to living as a woman. These are the people we must listen to, and we must learn from their experiences. So I'm going to read to you an edited YouTube testimony of one woman. Her name is Jaleesa, and I'd guess that she's in her 20s. She doesn't mention being on blockers, but it's clear from her low voice that she took testosterone. She started medical transition at age 18. She underwent a series of so-called gender-affirming surgeries. She had a bilateral mastectomy. She had removal of her uterus and ovaries. The walls of her vagina were sewn together, and then her surgeon took the skin and soft tissue of her forearm and constructed a faux penis and testicles. After surgery, she became addicted to pain medications. Now it's years later, and this is what she wants the world to know. How do I love myself again? How do I feel connected to myself again? I don't know what happened to me, and I'm just so angry. I'm so sad, and I don't know how this happened. Something infected me, a virus or something. It happened so quickly. If I just would have waited, she's crying here. If I just would have waited and let myself heal. I can't have kids. I'm left to accept the scraps of the life I could have had. I could have had a full life that now I need to mourn. I was young, I was sad, I was impressionable, and I thought this would fix everything. It's just so bad. It sucks so bad. It's just something I'll have to live with. There's no fixing it. There's no making it better. I don't see a path, a way to go forward. My body feels so foreign. It's hard to look at and accept that it's mine. As a woman who thought she was trans, I went all the way, as far as one can go. And then I woke up and realized that I made the biggest effing mistake of my life. There was a reason it took so long to detransition. It was to avoid the unavoidable. All of this mourning, this pain, this loss, this wreckage that I now have to sit with and figure out. I'm constantly asking, how did this happen to me? This woman is a victim of the medical experiment called gender-affirming care. Her suffering was 100% avoidable. And she says, if I just would have waited, if I just would have waited and let myself heal. Yes, exactly. That's the proper treatment. Waiting and healing from emotional wounds. And if you think her story is unusual, I suggest you go to Twitter, #DTrans, many other hashtags, and go to Reddit for DTrans. You have 38,000 people on there. 38,000 people telling their stories. As a doctor, I've seen catastrophic loss and suffering due to illnesses like cancer and schizophrenia. I can live with that. Gender ideology also leads to catastrophic suffering, but it is man-made. Teaching children to deny biology is man-made. Telling them they get to choose if they're a girl or a boy, or both or neither, because they may have been incorrectly assigned an identity at birth, that's a man-made idea. Making dangerous hormones and surgeries available without proper mental health evaluation and treatment, turning this into a civil rights issue, silencing and intimidating detransitioners and doctors like me who believe our patients will improve through waiting and healing. That approach is now deemed unethical. All that is man-made. I cannot accept it, and neither should you.
Those parents who have doubts about the claimed expertise of the LGBTQ+ expert panel may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included below.